Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is...
Corey's AI body double knot grinder.
Or is it? On today's episode, we'll discuss Sophos' 5-year battle with Chinese state-sponsored hackers targeting edge network devices. We'll then move on to Microsoft's current battle.
I don't want to do that.
Exactly. With threat actors compromising edge network devices targeting Microsoft services.
And then we will end too
with the discussion on artificial intelligence being used for the entirety of a common scam tactic.
And you'll leave the podcast relieved and happy with no worries on your mind and no anxiety at all.
As with every episode. With that, let's go ahead and generate our way in. So let's start with the first story for today, where last week Sophos disclosed a 5-year-long battle that they've been fighting against China-based threat actors, which they've dubbed Pacific Rim, which I think is a fantastic name for this. Hats off to them for that. But they basically walk through an entire multi-year-long APT attack that they've been battling against these threat actors in a blog post that they believe is potentially at least China state-sponsored in some cases too. There's an interesting quote from their article. They said, consistent with China's vulnerability disclosure legislation, XOps, which is Sophos's threat research team, assesses with high confidence that the developed exploits were shared with multiple distinct state-sponsored frontline groups with different objectives, capabilities, and post-exploitation tooling. So they're talking about basically they think there's a whole bunch of different groups that are coordinating together in China over the last 5 years to target edge networking devices, specifically Sophos ones, to go after Sophos themselves, as well as potential Sophos customers as well too.
I do, by the way, don't they say, I mean, they're focused on the Sophos vulnerabilities, but they do say they've affected other manufacturers too, including Fortinet, Barracuda, SonicWall, and many, many more. Totally different campaign than us, but we also know Russian threat actors seem to be doing the same. The one other thing I wanted to question, because you're talking about how XOP, they have the high confidence that multiple groups are sharing exploit tooling with the state, Chinese government. But my understanding too is it seems to be they might act like these, who's ever doing this, whether they're state sponsored or not, finding the vulns, they might be reporting them to bug crowd, to hacking, good guy hacking groups, bug bounty groups to get money, while also giving them to the Chinese government to at the same time, or maybe before, who knows the timing of it, but they're making money from them while sharing them with other groups like the government to profit off of, which I presume goes against almost every bug bounty's terms of service, but they seem to be doing that.
Generally, yes. If you reported a vulnerability to us in our bug bounty program and simultaneously shared it with the Chinese government, I don't think we would end up paying out a bounty for that one.
No. And I think the bug bounty programs, your agreement with them is if you share a vulnerability with them for payment, it should only be them, I believe. Yeah. I haven't read all of their terms, but the whole point is you're giving it to the one bug bounty for payment, not multiple ones.
So let's start from the top, though, because their timeline's pretty interesting, where they said the initial attack started in December of 2018, where they spotted a low-privileged computer that was being used as a wall-mounted video display doing a network scan of one of their remote office locations. Their initial investigation found malware that suggested what they thought at the time was an unsophisticated actor, but after further investigation, they found a previously unseen what they called large and complex rootkit that also included capabilities to pivot to cloud infrastructure too. Now, they initially disclosed and talked about this back in, I think, 2020, a couple of years after the incident. But when they initially did not attribute it to any specific threat actor, but they said that they now assess it with high confidence that it was an initial Chinese effort to collect intelligence that would aid in the development of future malware targeting network devices. So this was like the thing that kicked it off 5 years ago. Then in 2020, they had a wave of attacks throughout the course of that year. They were attempting to discover and target network appliances. Throughout this, they found and exploited a series of zero-day vulnerabilities targeting WAN-facing services. Like we talked about this on the podcast back in the day. There was like a wave of zero-day vulnerabilities and Sophos and other network equipment, like VPN access portals, for example. So this is where Sophos found links between vulnerability research from educational communities in Chengdu specifically, and sharing vulnerability intelligence with Chinese government agencies too. So like you pointed out a second ago, it sounds like they were reporting the vulnerabilities while simultaneously sharing them, and they were rapidly turned into weaponized exploits against these network equipment that were affected by it. The threat actors then shifted into stealth operations in 2022 up until present day, where they were narrowly focusing their attacks on government agencies, critical infrastructure, R&D organizations, healthcare, retail, finance, and the defense industry. Sophos mentioned that the threat actors focused less on automation during this phase now and more on like hands-on keyboard activity instead. So a lot of manual activity. They have much more stealthy persistence methods now, including custom rootkits. They were using the termite in-memory dropper. They were Trojanizing entire Java archives that were in use in some of these places. They had their own UEFI bootkit as well. They were using valid VPN credentials to attack organizations. And they were in these network devices hooking the firmware upgrade process to remain persistent in there as well too. They even specifically were targeting like telemetry systems in these devices to make it so Sophos couldn't get early warnings as they were targeting, let's say, honeypots or other devices that were out there reporting back telemetry. So it's pretty damn interesting, like as they go through their blog post, how this threat actor has evolved over the last 5, almost 6 years now in targeting edge networking devices.
Yeah, the people seeing the video or seeing the timeline, and it's just a long list of tons and tons of tactics. So very interesting, very sophisticated later on. And by the way, that's just one of 4 different blog posts Sophos has on various aspects of this.
And they had a few takeaways. And I mean, the 3 that they had in their first one are pretty obvious. Like edge networking devices are high value targets and well-resourced adversaries are going after them for initial access and persistence, which this is something we've been talking about for years now, that like these edge networking devices, they're intentionally exposed. They intentionally have services like VPN access enabled, and that makes them a prime target for threat actors.
Yeah. They never talk about management interfaces, which don't have to be exposed, though, but for the same reason, it's just a good reminder for listeners. Yeah, edge devices may have certain services like SSL VPN portal that you kind of have to expose to the way it's designed to be used. But other things like management, I mean, considering these are such high value targets, do not expose management or unneeded auth services to the internet for your key edge devices.
Yeah. Their next tip was state-sponsored attackers are using zero-day and unknown vulnerabilities to attack edge devices. Makes sense also. Like if you can go after one of these exposed devices at like a high-value target, like that's your foothold into the whole damn network, because these generally control remote access into the network as well too. And then their final one was targets are not limited to high-value espionage targets as well, too. Like these threat actors are setting up what they call operational relay boxes, basically a proxy botnet, to be able to launch their attacks against other organizations preying off of the public IPs of these legitimate
And we
victims.
talked about this in Cyclops Blink. Put plainly, is all the small businesses out there, like the car detailing shops or a restaurant with one POS device. You're using boxes like ours, like Sophos's, like Fortinet tabletops often, to help with PCI compliance and protect it. And all the small businesses that say I'm not a target, and I'm definitely not a target from a state sponsor because I don't have, any nation state information that any government would want. That's not true. They're simply trying to get resource. And if you think about it, it's valuable resource in countries other than theirs. Like if I'm the Chinese government and I can pop a lot of Sophos boxes in Europe and United States, I have attack infrastructure in the country I'm going after. So I think it's a big kind of paradigm change for people to realize I don't care the size of your business. We now live in a world where you are a state sponsored target. Your IP address and where you are in the world and a bastion host in your network is a valuable resource to external, very dangerous threat actors.
And that the whole bit about infrastructure within the country is another reason why like geolocation blocking is like a band-aid, not an actual meaningful security control.
Agree.
Because like a motivated threat actor can just go register an AWS account with stolen information, like a stolen identity, spin up a server anywhere in the US and use that to attack you. Like blocking Russia might help a little bit, but it's like I don't know, it's not a real protection.
I frankly just don't believe it in at all. I still hear our partners recommend that if you have infrastructure, if you don't have customers or things in China, Russia, or any places in the world, just geo-block it, which I guess is fine. It's not going to hurt anything. But considering it as security protection is very much security by obscure. Like nowadays, these especially sophisticated threat actors are not going to be attacking from their backyard. They're going to be attacking from your backyard. So geo blocking might block a few basic scams or at least make you have to pay attention to less of the internet that you don't really care about. But I don't think it's going to stop these threat actors at all.
Basically, you'll block the crappy ones, but not the actual good ones by using those methods.
Yep.
But speaking of compromised edge network devices, Microsoft published. There is. Microsoft published an article on Halloween about a very spooky event that they were dealing with, where they described their analysis of a highly evasive password spray attack that was leveraging a whole bunch of compromised TP-Link home office routers. So they linked this to, they call Covert Network 1658, which Covert Network was a new term for me in Microsoft threat actor nomenclature. That refers to a collection of public IP addresses consisting of compromised or leased devices that might be used by one or more threat actors. So, for example, one of their Storm threat actors, 940 specifically, is using Covert Network 1658 in order to carry out some of their activity. So Microsoft believes that the credentials acquired from the password spray attempt operations are being used by multiple Chinese threat actors, including Storm 940. So again, Storm in their naming convention is a loosely grouped threat actor that they haven't, they don't have a concrete attribution for them like they would like something Typhoon or something whatever.
By the way, quick pause since we're talking about password spray. I would hope 90% of our listeners know this, but password spraying is, to me, one of the least sophisticated type of brute force. You know, I think the two most common are password spraying versus a credential stuffing. But if I remember right, password spraying is typically just sending common credentials. It's not tied to a leak or a user's password.
Yep.
So it's kind of spray and pray, so to speak. I mean, in some password spray attacks, they may not even know the username, although sometimes they at least have email addresses for the target. Whereas credential stuffing is more targeted, where they have stolen credentials and are trying to associate those with the person's email or other emails that the person's or organization may have. So Just wanted to point out that we'll be talking a lot about this password spraying attack, but it is one of the lowest forms of brute forcing, although obviously it must have some value over time, as we'll get into.
Yeah. So let's first talk about those compromised devices, though. So they've been going after internet exposed TP-Link routers, where presumably like the management interface was exposed with some sort of vulnerability. They talked about some of their post-compromised activity on those routers, where the threat actors would download a telnet binary. They'd then download a backdoor binary from a remote FTP server. They'd use the telnet and that backdoor to start access-controlled command shell on a certain port on it. They'd then connect and authenticate to the backdoor on a specific port, 7777. They'd download a SOCKS 5 proxy, and then they would start using that SOCKS 5 proxy to proxy their password spray attempts through it.
So just connecting to the other story, this is kind of one type of form of orbs. It's taking over a routing device, adding a proxy to it, and now all your malicious activity seems to come from that one routing device on the internet, wherever it is.
Yeah. They think that there's around, they estimate 8,000 compromised devices, but the threat actors are only using around 20% of them at any given point in time. They noted that they're primarily seeing these password spray campaigns using these, like basically proxying through these devices. When it comes to the password spray attack, it's actually, I wouldn't say sophisticated, but it's designed to be evasive in that any given IP or username only has a single sign-in attempt per day in roughly 80% of the cases. In another 15%,
so it's
there's
trying
only two
to
attempts.
avoid any triggers of multiple, like if you try multiple passwords, the device might block that IP. So by going so low and slow, they can prevent or bypass any safeguards against brute forcing.
Yep. Microsoft also noted that there's been a couple of other research posts from folks at Sequoia and team Simru.
I remember I looked at how to pronounce that once, but now I forget. But I think it's the beginning is right. Kaimru or something like that.
Whatever. Well, they published some research articles earlier in the year, and there was actually a marked like drop in activity after each of those articles. So it seems like the threat actors are monitoring that, or people are implementing controls to block the activity what's tipping them off. And then once the attackers gain a valid credential, like a successful password spray attack, they then use those credentials to go after the organizations, typically their Azure environments or Microsoft 365 environments, and use that to steal and exfiltrate data. So one interesting thing is Microsoft didn't actually share any of the IP addresses, which kind of makes sense because these are effectively, they're all just victim
could
routers.
Be legit devices, yeah.
They did share user agent headers that the authentication attempts are coming from. And when I was looking back at our password spray attacks that we were tracking a couple of weeks ago, they were slightly different. Ours had a slightly different version of like Chrome listed as the like for like header in there. So I don't think it was directly related, but it was extremely similar behavior.
I was going to bring up that the industry is seeing this password spraying happening the entire year on and off. Like you say, we can't confirm that this is the same threat actor associated with our attack, but Cisco Talos released research in April with a very similar type of situation, although not specifically, TP-Link devices. And we saw stuff as early as February and April, although very low volume. Although this, to some extent, might explain the low volume, by the way. It may be low volume intentionally. So I think whether or not it's the same actor, it seems that threat actors are really industry-wide doing this type of password spraying any way they can. If it's not through these compromised devices, it can even be finding a login interface on any, internet-connected device and trying to slowly password spray it. So just be aware, they're causing all kinds of issues with these spraying attacks. And even though I've got to assume the fact that they're even popping some folks with password spraying just proves that people use very bad passwords still, especially for something that's internet connected. It's crazy.
Yeah. If they're successfully compromising accounts, it means there's no multi-factor authentication either, which blows my mind in 2024. I mean, the good news is like if you've got good password practices and if you have MFA, like you're pretty safe from this type of attack. That is assuming your authentication service doesn't tip over from the volume. But assuming that's not the case, like it's going to be extremely difficult for them to succeed in compromising an account through a password spray attack.
And that's kind of confirmed by Microsoft's recommendations after this. They're all about password practices, MFA, and not using this, legacy authentication protocols, which may be compromised or in other ways. So definitely check out their recommendations.
Yep. And if you don't already have good password practices enforced in your organization and MFA deployed, like I'd say now is the time, but really 10 years ago was the time. But I guess better late than never.
You haven't been
Um,
listening to this podcast if you, or you've just ignored every time we've said use MFA for the past 8 years.
I swear to God, if any of our listeners aren't using MFA, I'm extremely disappointed in you.
Uh-oh, Pop Mark is talking. Go to your room.
Exactly. Get off my lawn.
No
Uh,
devices.
moving on to the last story. This is actually a pretty fun research article, or I guess white paper I read last week from three researchers at UIUC, which I realize I probably should have figured out which university that is, but UIUC, where basically it was a white paper titled Voice Enabled AI Agents Can Perform Common Scams. And the goal from this was to create a AI voice enabled agent that could autonomously complete all of the steps required to finish a common social engineering scam. So, for example, like completing a bank account transfer or gift card exfiltration or like a crypto transfer or stealing credentials for your email account or impersonating the IRS and tricking you into giving gift cards. Like all the types of like common run of the mill scams that everyone in the world is experiencing on a daily basis. And their goal, it wasn't to automate the actual social engineering component of it, like the tricking someone into doing something. It was to figure out like, okay, if I've already succeeded in tricking someone into like falling victim to this attack, can I automate the entire rest of the pipeline? So, for example, in a banking scam, the scammer would normally need to navigate to the bank website, trick the user into giving them a username and password, entering those credentials into the website, tricking the user into completing MFA, navigating to the transfer page, and then actually transferring the money. So there's a lot of steps that go on as a part of this scam that they wanted to see if AI could potentially automate. The scammer would also need to handle any errors that come up, like if they misheard the password that the user gave them, they need to be able to go back and say, "Oh, sorry, that didn't work. Can you give me
And as
the
someone that's
actual
tried to
password?"
use dictation and voice assist, they never mishear things, Mark. They're so perfect.
Of course
Sorry.
not. So they developed
So
these
it is a
agents
legit
using
issue, that error detection, in case
exactly.
sarcasm went over anyone's head.
In case you weren't able to understand the verbal dictation of that sarcasm.
Yeah.
So they were using GPT-4o, which is the latest available model from OpenAI that has like voice-enabled capabilities. It's honestly a pretty freaking amazing model that I've been playing around with personally as well too. They included some browser access toolkits as well too for things like retrieving web pages and interacting with the web pages. And then they used standard jailbreaking prompts to bypass some of GPT-4o's guardrails. By default, it doesn't let you like pass or ask for credentials using it. That's like a pretty easy safeguard to put in. Well, I'd say it's easy. It's an obvious safeguard to put in, but apparently an easy one to jailbreak around in the case of these researchers. And then they tested the agents by talking with it, and they were pretending to be the victim. And they were like going again with the assumption that the victim already fell for the hook. And so they're already like bought into the scam, and they're going to do whatever the voice model tells it to do. So they tested it against targets
And by
like
the way,
my
this
minute.
is 100% goes with our one of our predictions this year, which is vishing. AI would improve vishing. I mean, we talk a little bit about these scams happen all the time, whether they're gift card scams, IRS scams, you owe a police fine for missing a court case spam, which my family knows intimately, unfortunately. Uh, but what always happens is they can make the automated calls super automated, but the second a human picks up, they have to divert to a human call center, which we've seen a lot of India call centers that actually participate in these scams. But that's where all the human capital is and the huge cost to these scams. So one of our predictions was that AI would improve vishing, and this paper, seems to be outlining exactly how you do that.
Yep. So they tested it against some websites like My Monero, Gmail, Instagram, Bank of America, and Google Play, for example. And they considered it a success if the AI agent was able to complete all of the actions required to complete that final action on objective, like stealing the money in most cases. So they tested things like bank transfers, crypto transfers, gift card exfiltration. Their overall success rates ranged from 20 to 60%, depending on the type of scam and its complexity. They averaged around 36%. Some of the more complex scams took around 3 minutes to execute, as they handled some of the back and forth and the additional tasks. The most expensive scam was the bank transfer one. It cost about $2.50 in processing power with the AI model. The average was around 75 cents for each one. The highest success.
Yeah. Oh, you're getting to it right now. I was going to say right away, you can see the profitable one for bad guys.
Yeah. The highest success rate was stealing Gmail credentials with a roughly 60% success rate and actually completing it successfully. The bank transfer was the lowest at 20%, but still with some success. And when it came to the failures there, sometimes it failed like what should be pretty simple actions, like it forgot to put in the recipient once for the bank transfer, and it forgot to put in a transaction date for the bank transfer in another case. But
by the way, to put this in perspective, though, the bank transfer still could be the most profitable in that, like, stealing a Gmail account is that's a good thing to have to sell that account to someone's real email, but it doesn't immediately turn into monetization without further hacks. Whereas a bank transfer, if someone has 2 to 20,000 or who knows what people have in some of their bank accounts, who cares if it costs 251 and only happens 20% of the time? If I'm able to immediately transfer $20,000 or maybe right under $10,000 to avoid any sort of government triggers, it's well worth it for the threat actor.
It's pretty nuts. And this is honestly, so I've always been thinking about AI being used for the hook, like the actual social engineering portion of it. But they've just proved that, at least with some success rate, you can automate the entire pipeline of not just the hook, but like everything that has to happen afterwards.
Unfortunately, I hate you saying entire pipeline because our predictions are coming out, and I kind of had a prediction here. So I guess this is all still research, so this may be supporting material for the prediction we'll still do. But by the way, unrelated, but when you had this research, I just wanted to mention that for the hook part, maybe not the entire pipeline, deepfakes and AI is already being successfully used to do bad stuff. This year, early or in the year, a accountant actually transferred 25 million equivalent US dollars because of thinking his chief financial officer, among other employees he both saw and heard on a Teams call or Zoom call, some sort of online call, asked him to do it. Apparently, the story here was it started with a phishing email, and this person in question was actually suspicious of it, but it had a internal Teams meeting link, and there are like 4 different employees from the company who all turned out to be deep fakes. And if you think this is just a one-off, Palo Alto has good research where this has been happening for campaigns, definitely targeting folks like CEOs, news anchors, and government officials using visual audio deepfakes. So, they're getting to the point where the visual and audio of some person you think is good enough to convince you, the hook part you mentioned. And now your research, or the research you're talking about, shows that they can use the same type of multimodal AI to do all the technical side of the pipeline. It's going to make these spear and whale attacks, the ones that actually target us and are really dangerous, way more volumetric and potentially even more successful. So definitely a brave new world.
It's super difficult to like come up with a good plan against this too, in like a hybrid or remote working environment. Like it used to be, the guidance would be, you get a suspicious email, call them over Teams or some other mode of communication to make sure it is who they say they are. But in theory, you can't trust that either. Like, do we need everyone to have?
Well, maybe you can. And maybe the difference here is you call them versus accept it. You know what I mean? Like we sometimes say, if you think a link might be valid, rather than click on it, visit the website manually. In the getting someone to go to Teams, it was an email where they clicked on someone else's, in this case, a threat actor call. And we know that depending on your settings, you can get external Teams meetings in your Teams. Mm-hmm. Whereas if just like they say, your bank's never going to call you and try to help you with malware, you will call them. So the fact that they're asking you to join the meeting. Maybe I get it that it's claiming to be your CFO, but maybe it's like, hey, wait, I'm going to actually call you back outside your meeting link in some way, even if it is Teams. So I hear you. You're exactly right. It's going to be much harder to validate, but I think the direction of the call is important. Like, and consider that even for internal meeting mechanisms. Don't click on their links. Use the internal mechanism that you know will get you to the right person, not necessarily one that will open up an external Teams call with people that look like the right people.
I'm also picturing a future where we all, like, in order to validate something like this, have to plug in our YubiKey and like hit a button or something in order to prove that we are physically who we say we are. But
yeah, it's crazy.
I hate that we are already at a point where you can't trust a video of someone anymore. It felt like a couple of years ago, that felt like a decade away, and we're already there. It's nuts.
Yeah, I think AI we're going to pass it very quickly. Yeah, it's exponential evolution. It's evolving much faster than humans, and that's I don't think we can perceive it just how fast we evolve. That's why people are quitting OpenAI and trying to figure out how to control it. By the way, just to give where credit was due, I couldn't find a place to mention it, but UIUC is University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.
Ooh, I love Champaign.
The Champaign, right? Champaign. It's like the beginning of champ and the end of campaign. So Champaign.
Okay.
Urbana-Champaign. University of Illinois. That's probably good enough.
Yeah, either way.
It probably isn't. You need the Urbana.
Cool research white paper just validating what we already suspected might be the case. And while the success rates were low right now, like you just mentioned, like how quickly AI is evolving, those success rates are going to reach much better levels, I bet, even by like this time next year, and probably way sooner.
I was playing with Notebook LM, and anything you start a research project on, you can make a 10-minute podcast, and it will be a man and a woman talking very colloquially about it. And we probably won't have a job. It will be our AI doubles doing this for us.
Honestly, if that frees up more time for me, I support that. How does our audience know that this is even real right now? Maybe we're already deep faking everything. We could be using it now.
Mark already showed you his deepfake message of my voice a while back.
And you all wouldn't even know. Man, scary. That's a challenge for you all. Everyone that's listening, your task now is to send us a message on, Instagram, WatchGuard_technologies, when you detect the first episode that we have totally faked from start to finish.
That should be our challenge too. We'll promise to release one of those sometime in 2025, and we'll give a prize to whoever notices.
That sounds good. A prize paid for by WatchGuard's marketing budget. I approve this message. It's a new car. Maybe not. Probably not. Enjoy your
not
t-shirt.
Quite that big.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed, that's the word.
Enjoyed.
If you enjoyed today's episode,
it was AI dictation. It got it wrong.
Sure,
did. This is the fake one. This has to be the fake one.
Well, that's how you know it's real when I stutter. Where the hell was I? If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics, or if you think this is the fake episode, you can reach out to us on Instagram at WatchGuard_technologies. Thanks again for listening, and you will hear from us next week.
Hint, hint, we don't think that far ahead for the ideas we make up live on the podcast, so I wouldn't vote for this one.
Or is it?
Maybe.